Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Rustin Smith, pastor of Vox Day Community, and I'm here once again with John Bowles, pastor of Beggar's Table Church. And we are having a conversation about the Sermon on the Mount.
Continued conversation.
Yeah, we've been talking about this as words to build a life on because that's how Jesus caps it at the end. He says you can build your life on these words, and these words, those words are the Sermon on the Mount, which begin with this long section that we know as the Beatitudes. Mm-hmm. Today's kind of special because it's the last Beatitude.
Yeah, we've been doing these for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's blessed are the persecuted. The blessed are you when you're persecuted, mm-hmm. for the kingdom of heaven is yours. So what do you make of that, Rustin?
Yeah. Well,
what does that mean?
Look, every one of these,
Yeah.
we've had to dig into the words. They're so easily misunderstood, and we have to deal with what first comes into our heads when we hear words.
Yeah.
In order to think well and read well and to understand what Jesus meant. Persecuted is another word that my mind goes to a couple places, both probably cartoonish and inaccurate. So, do you want to hear them?
What are those places?
Well, one is the kind of classic missionary Christian persecution. You know, I read Fox's Book of Martyrs when I was in college and was enamored with those people who boldly lived out their faith and died for it in so many cases. I think that is authentic persecution for the reasons of faith.
Yeah,
right?
No doubt.
And yet now we live in a culture that is where I think maybe Christians feel persecuted, but I question whether or not that's authentic, mm-hmm. or whether it's just stirred up by political interests. You know, war on Christianity, and they're going to tear down your Jesus statue and take away your Ten Commandments, and so I've run into a lot of that sense of like we're Christians and we're persecuted in our culture, and I'm sometimes just like, you're persecuted because no one likes you, not because you're a Christian.
It's kind of like what they say that fear motivates, but mm-hmm. it's also like the sense of persecution motivates. Like I can get motivate you to do something political for my agenda if I can make you think that you're being kept down or something like that. I don't know. Does that ring true?
Well, that works because I was just about to vote for you right then.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I find this to be a real interesting way to end the Beatitudes, especially because let me put it to you this way. If I was painting a picture of a person, which in some ways that's what the Beatitudes are, they're painting a picture for us of, we could say, of a godly person. And if I was painting this picture of someone who was meek and poor in spirit and merciful, first of all, what kind of person do you initially get the idea that I'm painting? The godly person equals let's just say the kind person.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, every one of those things is a quality you'd like in a friend and the people you hang out with.
And if we're honest, we might think to ourselves, you're really painting a picture of an incredibly irrelevant person. Well, like the ultimate wallflower,
I get that's true.
Yeah.
And we dealt with some of that along the way, the idea of meek and...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking that way about the Beatitudes, and this is the picture that you're having painted for you, the final stroke of the artist's pen, the artist's brush, you probably don't expect him to end with persecution because that doesn't fit with that picture. Now I'm painting the picture of the ultimate nice wallflower who really is pretty irrelevant because they're so busy mourning and grieving and being meek and all of these wrong interpretations of these words. And then all of a sudden persecution comes out of the blue. It's like, what? Yeah. That's the last person I would think would be persecuted. So what I want to suggest is that if you are surprised, or if anyone's surprised when persecution comes, that's your first clue that maybe you've misread the Beatitudes. Okay. Maybe your idea of what meek means isn't exactly spot on. Maybe you're thinking hungering for righteousness doesn't mean justice. Maybe you're not really understanding what we talked about last week about what peacemaking really is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I had a friend once who said he was so worried, he was a musician, and he said he was so worried about becoming a Christian. He knew he wanted to be a Christian, but he was afraid that when he became a Christian, he wasn't going to have any more fun.
Yeah.
And I think there are some enduring stereotypes of the Christian, and some of them come from this kind of language of like this wallflower, boring,
Yeah.
straight lace, not going to do anything. I remember N.T. Wright saying something about being a bishop and the high-mindedness of what he thought it should mean to be a bishop in the Church of England. He was like, Paul was a bishop, and everywhere he went, there was a riot.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm a bishop, and everywhere I go, they serve tea.
Yeah. Right.
So I think there is something in the culture of the Christian is the nice and quiet and, somebody who's not relevant.
That's why it's so important to get a right reading of these words. And that's why I hope that this conversation has been meaningful and good for everyone. I would certainly encourage you, if you watching us have not listened or watched our other podcasts, I would say go back and catch up on those, because I think the right interpretation of these is so important, and we definitely have the right interpretation.
Well, there's at least a lot at stake, and hopefully we're taking them seriously, even if we're not getting them all right.
You're definitely right. So persecution means a lot in this list. It's the final stroke of this portrait. And this is the thing, Rustin. I want to, with your help, I want to talk through a certain approach to the Beatitudes. And I want to do this. I'm going to take all of the Beatitudes together in this approach. Because I think that when we do this, it will lead up to a better understanding of what persecution is. Okay? Yeah. So this is the thing. I have grown to pay attention to any time I see a list of things in Scripture. Yeah. Like anytime there's things cataloged or just kind of a listing of any sorts, I don't know what it is about my personality, but I kind of perk up and I just pay attention. So we just got through Lent and beyond Lent because of coronavirus. We just got done doing this series of conversations on Jesus' 7 last words. Right. And of course, when I read those, and I know you do this too, I see a list. Yeah. And then I perk up and I go, there's 7. 7's a holy number. Yeah. What is this? What are these 7 words? There's got to be some intentionality here. And so what we did in that conversation is that we mapped out a pathway to living into our true self, is what we called it, and dying with Jesus on the cross, dying to our false self. That's right. And now, the thing is, whether this is what the author intended, whether this is intentional or not, is really not the point, because it's helpful. Yeah. It's true because it's true. Yeah. And but I will say this: I do think that there's more intentionality in Scripture in general than especially in the Gospels, than we tend to give credit to or realize. Yeah. Well,
I think you think that. I agree with you, by the way. Good. I know that's important.
That's important. It is.
But I think you think that because you appreciate art and you know how art is made, and you are an artist and a writer, and you do it intentionally. And even historians, I heard someone say that even history is a process of massive selection and arrangement. Well, and that's what we're dealing with culturally right now, is who gets to write history and which version of history is truest. And exactly. Right. The scriptures are not immune from that. There's a certain sense in which they are propaganda. Now, I would say true propaganda, sure. but it's information displayed in a way to try to change you.
Definitely.
So it has an agenda, and that's okay, because it's a good agenda in this case.
Right. When these men were writing these Gospels, I believe that they were trying to change the world. Yes. And they wanted this writing to change the world. Yeah. And so they didn't write things haphazardly. No. When they wrote that Jesus said, "I thirst," from the cross, they weren't just like, well, he said it, I guess I'll write it. Right. I mean, they had a reason to write this. These things mean things. And so obviously when Jesus says the Beatitudes, and there's this list of Beatitudes, and they're set the way they are in a certain order, I believe that Matthew and Luke have a reason behind that order, and they're trying to change the world in that ordering. And so it's cool and good for us and right for us to pay attention to that, right? Yeah,
I think so. And the world always begins with a reading of it, and in community, and even in conversation like this, of an act of humility, of submitting ourselves to what this wants to do to us before we're ever going to hope to understand it.
Right. So all that to say, maybe you can help me just talk through this.
All right,
this is, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to ever notice these things, but it'll be fun to talk about. I'm gonna word it like this. I think that there's a progression in the Beatitudes, and it's a progression of intentionality, or you could call it activism or ownership for our actions in the world. So,
Okay.
when the Beatitudes begin, it starts off with 3 Beatitudes that are largely out of our control. This is a picture. If we're painting the picture, this is a picture of life happening to us.
Okay.
And the thing is, that's true for everyone. Life happens to us. I mean, to a great degree, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian, not Christian, religious, not religious. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor. All of us, to a degree, receive life. It happens at us and to us, and we're recipients of it.
Yes.
Fair?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's 2020. I think we all are learning that this year. Life happens to us. There are things beyond our control.
yeah. Maybe I'll just talk about these in a little bit more detail.
So
Before
you said
we
the
move
first
on.
three.
The first 3
are about that. So what are those?
Well, you've got poor.
Poor in spirit.
Luke says poor. Matthew says poor in spirit.
All right.
I mean, regardless of how you want to split hairs with that, the bottom line is nobody really chooses any kind of poverty.
Right.
It's a place where we find ourselves, and we receive that. And one could almost say that the poor in spirit leads to, especially once we kind of accept it, it leads to mourning. And that's the second one, is mourning or grieving. Again, this is nothing that you like set out to do. If I told my kids, I want you to mourn when I count to 3, they wouldn't be able to do it. Mourning is something, it's a result of life happening to us.
And you might say the very act of being able to mourn is an acknowledgement of one's own lack and poverty. Something has happened that I can mourn.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a connection there.
Okay, that's good. I'm with you.
And then mourning I think living into these two helps to produce a state of meekness. And again, meekness is not weakness, as we said.
Yeah.
But
quiet, content.
If I become accepting of the poverty that I have, whatever that poverty might look like, whether it's financial or whether it's of spirit, and then I grieve that and I become accepting to those two things, then it helps shape me into a content person. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, and a person who's unassuming, who doesn't take things for granted, who has some humility, knowing that life can come at you. Yeah. Yeah,
okay. Exactly.
That's good.
So you've got a portrait of someone who is not incredibly intentional about life. This is just kind of the product of learning to accept life as it happens to him or happens to her. Now, right in the middle of the Beatitudes, there's this one that stands out immediately, because all of a sudden we have a beatitude that is about our desire, is about our heart and what we want and what we crave. It's not necessarily about action as much as it's about what leads to action, and that's our heart. What we call, or I think Dallas Willard maybe called, our heart a wanter. Our wanters are wanting something. And the thing is, what I want to suggest, of course, before I go there, let me just recap. What we're wanting, Jesus uses more poetic language than wanting. He says hungering and thirsting for, which is a great descriptive language for what we crave,
for desire.
what we desire. What it is that we're desiring, of course, is righteousness or justice. And so what I'm proposing is that once we accept whatever poverty we find ourselves in, and once we learn to grieve over that, and once we allow ourselves to be the quiet, content person who is like, this is who I am and this is who the world is, then it sets our wanter up. Because we talked about it before, our hearts change, and they're moldable, and our wants, our desires can be changed. And I think all of that helps to change our hearts into people who want justice and crave justice. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah,
and I don't think we get in touch with our deepest longings until we've reached a certain stage of being honest about the way things actually are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that was another Willard thing. That he said confession is just saying, this is how I really am.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you say that, then you can acknowledge not only this is who I am in positive ways and what I bring to the table and the joy of me for everyone, but also here are the things that are just messed up in me and in my world, and I can now admit that I want those things to be different.
Yeah. And, you know, I just thought of this off the top of my head too, but we might never get to a place where we can crave or hunger and thirst for justice if we don't allow ourselves to mourn, you know, and then if we don't allow ourselves to calm down enough so that we can see things for what they really are and see ourselves for who, you know, all of that kind of sets us up.
Well, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of you now. I'm starting to see a pattern that you're going to tell me about.
Well, exactly. So here we go. We've got the first three Beatitudes, which is kind of life happening to us. We're not that intentional.
So, poor in spirit, mourning, meekness, or accepting reality.
To kind of cultivate our hearts so that once we live into those, our hearts are pointed in the direction where where our wanter is pointed in the direction where it's wanting justice and righteousness.
Yeah. For things to be set right.
For things to be set right. Yeah, what we call justice. And then, sure enough, that leads to the next Beatitudes as being actions. Things that we are intentional about. Things that we take control over. Okay. So the very next one is showing mercy. And now, all of a sudden, it's shifted. We're no longer just receiving life. Now, we are kind of in a position of quote-unquote power where we're doing something, right? We are showing, we are giving. We're not just receiving life and adjusting. We're giving mercy. Yeah. We're giving. We have become proactive now. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Jesus has flipped here from what you might think of as descriptive. He's describing the way life actually is to prescriptive. He's saying, now go do this.
Yeah, it's
go
good
be
language.
like this.
Yeah, that's good language.
Okay.
Now we're prescriptive. So yeah, I love that. Now here's your prescription. Here's what you do.
Here's what you do with your hunger.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I'm showing mercy, pure in heart. The way that we talked about it and understand it is that this is something that we're doing. We are cleaning the window of our soul, so that we are able to see God. Right. So we're able to see, and I would say that so we're able to see God all around us, not just in the Bible or not just at church, but we see God in this God-bathed world.
Begin to see that the Spirit has gone swirling into the cosmos. We talked about recently in Vox. God is at work in the world, and our mission flows out of like asking what is God up to and how do we get involved in it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So but that requires the cleansing of the lens so that we can see accurately what Jesus calls pure in heart.
Yeah, exactly. So we're doing, we're giving mercy, we're cleansing our lens, and then of course the third one. So you had three. Then you had one in the middle, which was about our desire or wanter. Now we've got three actions. The third one is making peace, makers of peace, which of course means that we, as we said last week, we're being present and we're stepping into conflict in order to bring peace and make peace. It's the opposite of being, I'm going to hide.
Right. We're not hiding and we're not forcing, but we're staying present and being a voice of peace.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you see that progression?
I do.
Yeah.
I like it. That's useful.
I know these conversations would be so much more stimulating if we disagreed with each other. But
yeah. Well, I mean, I can't do any of those things. So that provides a little bit of narrative tension.
I understand. So there's a progression here I see of intentionality. And of course, so you've got this pattern of three, which...
You're suggesting that Jesus knew what he was doing.
That Jesus knew what he was doing. That these are not just haphazardly put up again.
All right.
So you've got the three with the one in the middle of bookended by 3 and 3. 3 more passive, just kind of accepting beatitudes to 3 more aggressive, more intentional, proactive, active. Okay. And then you've got what we've called the final stroke.
Which is funny because traditionally a lot of people will list the Beatitudes as 7 Beatitudes. And there's always this 8th statement that is clearly a Beatitude, but it kind of gets left off at the end, maybe because people don't know what to do with it.
Don't know what to do with it. Well, if you notice, blessed are the persecuted,
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of circled back to where we began. In other words, this is a beatitude that describes life happening to us.
Okay.
This is something that we, once again, are not in control of. Only what sticks out to me is that the way life happens to us now that we've developed into this kind of a person is a little bit different than the way life happens to us before we're this kind of person. Now, this is the gift we get. Life happens, it still happens to us, but now it comes with this persecution.
Yeah. And this one is interesting because it's not just a persecution. Like when Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, that's, if we're just taking it as you're saying, is like, nobody chooses that. That's just going to happen. And everybody's going to have some sort of sense of poverty if you're honest about your life. But now, when he says, blessed are those who are persecuted, he's saying persecuted because of righteousness. So almost, if we're going with this progression, now things are happening to you because of these other beatitudes that you have lived into.
Yeah, because you've lived into you've allowed the first 7 to form you.
Yeah.
Now life happens to you in this way, and it takes the form of persecution.
And persecution because you're doing the right thing.
Because you're doing the right things, righteousness. You're doing the right things now. Yeah. And if you look closely, the beatitude, the language itself, provides a kind of circle back. And what I mean by that is the first one, poor in spirit, what we hear is, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
When you end with persecution, sure enough, Jesus goes back to that language and says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He repeats himself.
So I want to explore why that is, but first I want to say, I know that's intentional because as a songwriter, I would never use a phrase twice unless I was highly intentional about it. Like you're writing a poem, even if you're writing a good paragraph, you don't repeat a word unless you're trying to draw emphasis or parallel to call it back into the person's mind that's reading or hearing. Right? So I assume that Jesus is the smartest person who's ever lived and knows exactly what he's doing, and this is recorded accurately. So when he circles back and says kingdom of heaven again, that's got my attention just as a reader. Like, what might he be getting at by doing that?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I see this, I see this as we're circling back to this idea that life will happen to you, but it happens to you differently now. It
happens differently.
Yeah.
And so what's the encouragement there? That the kingdom of heaven belongs to you. So it's what's the kingdom? God's governance, God's reign. The kingdom is where what God wants to happen happens.
Yeah.
It's also, as we said early on in this, God's politic.
Right.
Politics being the way that we organize our collective life and community.
Right.
It's as if Jesus is saying, hey, guess what? Poverty happens, but be assured that the kingdom's not in trouble. Let me remind you of this kingdom where God gets God's way. So be comforted. And then when he comes back again to saying, hey, life happens, you're going to be persecuted now for these reasons, but don't forget, you're still living in God's community.
Right.
Is that
I think that's really good. Yeah.
Bookending it with the idea of you are secure in this space with God's people.
And I think persecution itself is a great descriptor for what life in the kingdom for us right now in this world will look like. Because, Rustin, the language of kingdom is intentional. And the Bible doesn't say that it's God's hangout or it's God's cool place to be. It says it's God's kingdom, and the language of kingdom is meant to cause tension, because kingdom that's a threatening word.
It's territorial.
It's territorial, and what you're doing is you're introducing kingdom into kingdom. There's already a kingdom,
right?
So it would be like somebody today saying, "Well, I know what America is, but I'm bringing to you God's America," and who's going to be threatened by that? Yeah. The people that run America. I mean,
right.
I don't know if that got us off track or not, but
I was trying to come up with a Chiefs Kingdom reference.
A Chiefs Kingdom, that's good. That's good.
That would take us even further.
So I'm just saying, kingdom. The language of kingdom is a threatening kingdom.
Yeah. Well, kingdoms have everything to do with geography and power and allegiance.
Yeah. It's deliberate language. It's meant to be unsettling.
Yeah.
And so, I've talked about this to Beggar's Table before. I'm sure you've said this before too. I always think of kingdoms as rotating on an axis. Like whatever that axis is what that kingdom values the most and what makes it happen. And the kingdoms of our world, of our culture, especially dominant cultures, all rotate on power. Power is the number one thing. And in Jesus, God's kingdom is different. It doesn't rotate on power. It rotates on love. And I think that that's threatening the kingdoms of power because they rotate on different axes. And so it leads to this question, how are we persecuted then? If we're living into a kingdom that rotates on love, we're not persecuted because we're being obnoxious. We're not persecuted because we're being mean. I mean, our kingdom rotates on love. That's not what it's about.
Yeah.
And then
that's good. And I mean, I guess I feel troubled every time it goes this way, but it always goes this way. There's always a laying down of self and emptying of self and giving away of self. And I suppose if you're practicing these things of being merciful and learning to see clearly, which takes patience and humility, and if you're learning to do peacemaking, which is, nobody wants that job, it just puts you in this position of suffering, but not at least intending to cause suffering. It takes you out of power and dominance over others to get your way and brings you into a place of self-emptying to get your way. It reminds me of Matthew 11. Jesus made in Matthew 11 this mysterious statement that I still don't think I totally understand what he's talking about, but he does this poetic thing where he says, I think he's getting the news about John the Baptist and the bad things befalling him, and he says, the kingdom of God suffers violence, and violent people take it by force. And he's almost lamenting, like, this is the way it is. If you're going to be in the kingdom of God, you're going to take your blows, and that right. But the way that we're going to respond to that, he demonstrates. He lays down his life.
It's so good. That's so good.
That's sobering, but it's good. That's good stuff because that feels real and true to Jesus.
I want to suggest that the persecution that we feel now, is not only just laying down our lives, but Jesus himself elaborates a little bit on it. And I think that it has to do with if we live into the Beatitudes, if we live this path, that it has to do with being misunderstood. That's what sticks out to me. What he says in verse 11 is, blessed are you. It's the only beatitude he elaborates on. And he says, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you. And then and falsely say all kinds of evils against you because of me. Now, what sticks out to me is this idea of falsely saying evil about you, which when I hear that, I think of being misunderstood, like misrepresented.
Right.
I know.
Is there anything more painful than being misunderstood? And being rejected for false reasons?
I think that you and I resonate with that. And I don't think it's just because we're pastors. I think that Christians in general, when we try to follow Jesus and genuinely live into, let's just say, the Beatitudes, let alone the whole Sermon on the Mount, I think that all of us kind of know to a degree what it means to be misunderstood and to have false accusations leveled at us. Because the dominant culture that rotates on an axis of power doesn't understand us when we try to live according to another kingdom. And I think maybe in honesty, they're trying to interpret us, and their interpretation is off kilter, and it makes us look bad. They're because our motivation is hard for them to understand and to see. But you're right. There's nothing that hurts as much. Like I realized about myself, I don't mind conflict. I don't like conflict, but I don't mind it. I can take confrontation, all of that kind of thing. But what I don't like is when I'm misunderstood in confrontation.
Yeah.
When someone walks away from that confrontation saying things about me that aren't true because it's just I misrepresented myself or they misinterpreted anything.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the kind of persecution that Jesus, to a degree, is talking about here. When you become this person, you're going to be misunderstood by this dominant culture.
Well, a person living into all these, I think, it's that kingdom thing. It becomes kind of a threat to the status quo. If you're actually going to live these things out, your life is it's a critique of how everybody else is doing it, right?
Yeah, right.
It's a subtweet to normal life.
That is really good. It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of the light and darkness that, I won't get us off on that tangent, but I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so that's so good. You know, Rustin, I think it was Dallas Willard that brought to my attention for the first time that the Sermon on the Mount, we'll be talking more about the Sermon on the Mount as we go forward, but that the Sermon on the Mount is really about how to live with one another. You know, it's about community. That Jesus knew what he was doing. He was establishing this community of people, and what we were going to have to learn is how to live with one another. So we're calling this series Words to Build a Life On. We could easily call it Words to Build a Community On, because I think that what we're talking about is, as you said, the politic of God, the politics of Jesus, like how to be with each other. And what Jesus has done here is he has, I think the Beatitudes in many ways summarize the whole thing. You know, this is it. And you could almost say the rest of the Sermon on the Mount is commentary on the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
You know.
That'll be fun to find out if we still think that going through it again this time, because I think that's right.
Yeah. So that's what I've got.
That's good. Well, let's. I want to keep talking about this, but let's wrap it up with a with a blessing. I brought a prayer this time, a good old Wesleyan prayer that I just revisited this week, and it's full of challenge, but so is Jesus. So this is a very Jesus-like prayer. So I'll pray this. I am no longer my own, but yours. Put me to what you will. Rank me with whom you will. Put me to doing. Put me to suffering. Let me be employed for you or laid aside for you. Exalted for you or brought low for you. Let me be full. Let me be empty. Let me have all things. Let me have nothing. I freely and wholeheartedly yield all things to your pleasure and disposal. And now, glorious and blessed God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you are mine, and I am yours. Amen.
Amen.